They had a 44% reduction in gut discomfort and 60% in total GI symptoms. And very importantly, they reduced the amount of carbohydrate that went to waste, so less carbohydrate malabsorption. That Triathlon Show 122. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I will talk about training your gut to tolerate consuming gels and carbohydrate in general in training and racing. I have to admit that I'm kind of rushing to get this episode out. I'm recording it just 3 days before it's supposed to be released, which is totally against what I usually do. But I'm still struggling to get one interview done. I'm interviewing John Keeley on periodization, which is a fascinating interview, but we are having all sorts of technical issues, and now John needs to get a new laptop to be able to really do anything, so it affects all of his other work as well, I think, because his old computer is really shutting down on him. But we still thought we would be able to do it, but it turns out we were not. So I just tried to do the interview with him and we didn't manage. There were issues on his microphone. So I had to come up with another topic. So this one will be fairly short and to the point for that reason, but it is a topic that hasn't really been covered yet, at least not from what we actually know from science. So I'm happy to be able to give you some insights on that, on what we know about gut training and training your gut to tolerate carbohydrates and absorb them and all those sorts of things. We'll get right into that after thanking our sponsors. First, this episode is sponsored by Precision Hydration. If you suffer from cramping or just unreasonably large performance decrements in the heat, or even nausea, it's very likely that the reason is, or at least part of the reason is, that you're not replenishing your electrolytes correctly. And this is a case where you can't just take blind guesses at how much electrolytes you need. You can't just take some salt tablets, put them in your pocket, and take them randomly in your race. It won't work. And that's why Andy Blow, that's what he did when he was racing. But then he found out that it didn't work, and he founded Precision Hydration to solve that problem. And you can hear Andy's interview on episode 40, and actually very soon coming up he will be on episode 126 talking about swim run training, so that will be cool. But with Precision Hydration, going back to that, it becomes super easy for you to create and execute a precise electrolyte plan. First, take their online sweat test on precisionhydration.com. Then get the electrolyte products that match your individual sweat needs. And finally, just follow the plan. Again, that's precisionhydration.com. Use the promo code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, all caps, to get your first box for free. This episode is also sponsored by Stack, and there's just a few more days left to pre-order the world's quietest, most foldable indoor trainer, a Stack Zero. Actually, the new smart trainer is called something else, and I should have checked what its name will be, because I know that the Stack team just put out the results of their survey or their poll, where basically anybody could vote for the new name. Anyway, it's a new smart trainer that you can get for a €150 discount, and this opportunity goes away on the 30th of April. And now I have checked with Andrew, you cannot combine this discount with the code TTS20 that would normally give you 20% off. But so if you do pre-order it, please send the Stack team a message telling them that Triathlon show sent you, because remember, sponsors are what keeps this show alive. So we really need to show them that they're sponsoring the show makes an impact. So the address for that, where you can find all about the new Stack Zero Smart Trainer, is stackzero.com/pre-order. All right, let's go right into talking about training your gut. So this topic of training your gut is something that came up in quite a few of the coaching calls that I had recently with the athletes that I coach. And we've been talking about how they should fuel their training now that spring is here and a lot of them are getting out on the roads finally and doing longer rides. That's something that we've paid attention to. And I started to realize when I was saying that one of the main reasons that you should train is not just to perform in training, but also you need to train your gut to tolerate it in racing. And I started thinking, what do we actually know based on science on this topic? And I started looking around, and there is quite a bit that we could definitely do with more information, more studies on this topic, as always. But what we do know, it gives us a great starting point. So let's just give a quick background to what can happen if you have not trained your gut. That's basically gastrointestinal problems, or GI problems for short. They are very common in endurance sports, and I'm now citing Asker Jokendrup and his review called Training the Gut for Athletes that was published in Sports Medicine in 2017. So a very, very reputable journal. He writes that 30 to 50% of all athletes experience GI problems regularly. The causes are largely unknown, but appear to be partly genetically determined and highly individual. The mechanisms are likely to be different for upper and lower GI problems. The symptoms are more likely to occur and are exacerbated by hot weather conditions and dehydration. Although a link with nutrition intake is not always found, certain practices have been found to correlate with the incidence of GI problems like fiber intake, fat intake, and highly concentrated carbohydrate solutions that all seem to increase the prevalence of GI problems. So that gives you the background to the actual problems, and of course you know that you need, especially in racing but also in training, consume energy because your energy stores are limited, your glycogen stores are limited in your body, and if you don't consume energy you'll bonk and you won't perform as well. So we've talked about this in episode 100 on that triathlon show that was called Nutrition Before, During and After Workouts. Basically the guidelines, and this is something that is very well established, is to consume between 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And if you only consume one type of carbohydrate, like glucose, let's say you have a sports drink that is only glucose and no fructose or other carbohydrate sources, then you can only basically absorb 60 grams, so you should only take in 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour. But if you have multiple carbohydrates in whatever your fuel is, most gels, for example, are a mixture of glucose and fructose in a 2-to-1 ratio, then you can go up to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour because you will be able to absorb it, since there are different transporters in your body, in your intestines, that transport different sorts of carbohydrate. And actually something that is pointed out in the review study is that there's actually less risk of GI distress when you go for the 90 grams of multiple sorts of carbohydrates compared to even just compared to 60 grams of just one single carbohydrate source. So that is very interesting. Alright, so far this is all things that you basically know already. I believe we talked about it before on this podcast. But training the gut, what are the different ways that you can do it, and how does it impact you and benefit you? So there are, again, this review article is available for free in its full version. I'll link to it in the show notes, of course. There's a great visual graphic there that shows the different ways. And first we have the first method of training the gut is training with relatively large volumes of fluid to train the stomach. And this reduces bloating and fullness during exercise, and it can also increase gastric emptying. The second method is training immediately after a meal. And this has the same two effects, and it can also increase your capacity to absorb carbohydrate. The third method is to train with relatively high carbohydrate intake during exercise. So that would be in that 60 to 90 grams per hour range. And this also has all of these three physiological effects: reducing bloating and fullness, increasing gastric emptying, and increasing the capacity to absorb carbohydrate. And the fourth one is to simulate the race with a race nutrition plan. And this is the same as the last point in a way, but it can be more specific, perhaps, like you have specific intensity and trying to make all of this work at that intensity as well. It can even be something like conditions, like if you can train in the heat for a hot race and see if you can still tolerate the energy that you have planned to take in that heat. That's another example of how this simulating the race kind of goes beyond just training with relatively high carbohydrate intake. And finally, increased carbohydrate content of your diet, depending on what your diet currently is another way that you can improve your capacity to absorb carbohydrate. And all of these physiological effects that I mentioned, they in the end lead to reduced gastrointestinal problems, increased delivery of carbohydrate to the muscles, and both of these then combine to ultimately result in improved performance. This is all summarized, as I said, in a nice picture in the review study. Definitely check that out. It's linked to in the episode descriptions. So if we talk about these one at a time, first train your stomach to handle large volumes of fluid. There's one study by Lambert and colleagues that showed that trained runners were able to comfortably tolerate ingestion of a carbohydrate electrolyte solution at a rate approximately equal to their sweat rate during 90 minutes of running at a steady state, 65% of VO2 max. And the researchers observed that their stomach comfort significantly improved over time when they practiced this protocol, these high intakes over and over again, because consuming as much as you sweat, the conditions were 25 degrees Celsius, 30% humidity, by the way. That definitely is quite a lot of sweat that you'll lose, and consequently a lot of fluid that you need to drink. So the conclusion of this is that training for intake of larger volumes can be an effective strategy to avoid discomfort in races, and especially if you feel discomfort already with relatively small volumes of fluid. The next point that we will cover here is high carbohydrate intake in training and race nutrition simulation. So if I summarize what the review study writes about that, it's that in addition to an increased absorptive capacity, this kind of training becomes easier to tolerate, and gastric emptying can be improved when it's practiced in training. Gastric emptying is usually not considered a limiting factor, but if certain conditions are in place, like heat and high carbohydrate intake and a high intensity, then they can combine and compromise gastric emptying. So it is important to practice both high carbohydrate intake in general, but also at race intensities and at in race conditions like heat, for example. If you have a hot race, then you should try to, if possible, practice your nutrition strategy in that kind of heat to get used to these volumes of or these amounts of carbohydrate in that specific condition. And the next point that I want to go into here is dietary content and how that affects or is part of your gut training. We don't know exactly what the link between your daily carbohydrate intake and the transport capacity for carbs in your bloodstream is, but some studies indicate that there can be a strong link and that we can improve our capacity to transport and absorb carbohydrates by increasing the percentage of carbs we eat in our daily diet. So one such study investigated, they had 16 trained cyclists, and they were divided in two groups, one control group and one high carb group. And they trained 16 hours per week for 28 days. Both groups improved their performance. And the high carb group, they had a supplement with an additional 1.5 grams of carbs per kilogram body weight per hour of exercise added to their diet, and the baseline diet for both groups were 5 grams per kilogram per day, and then basically the amount varied based on the amount of training they did each single day. And as I said, both of these groups improved their performance a similar amount, but what was interesting was that the group that took extra carbs, they managed to improve how much of exogenous carbs, like gels or sports drinks, that they could actually use for fuel in training and racing. So not all carbs that you take on can necessarily be used by the muscles. Some will go to waste, so to say. And this was something that this group that took extra carbs, that they improved after the 28-day period. They were able to reduce the waste. But that said, the review study goes on to talk about the fact that for a single form of carbohydrate, transport capacity hardly ever exceeds 60 grams per hour in individuals. So there likely is a limit to how much you can train your ability to transport carbs. And so if you are already on an endurance diet that contains a pretty high amount of carbs, then probably you might not see that much improvement by increasing that even further. But if you are on a low carb diet or something like a ketogenic diet, then that's the case when you probably could see your ability of carb transportation to improve. And this can happen very quickly. It can happen within a few days, 3 days to 2 weeks. For example, this is a study that's referenced in the review. It's not based on endurance athletes. It's actually animal data. But one study found that an increase in dietary carbohydrate from 40 to 70% of the daily calorie intake, that doubled the amount of SGLT1 transporters, so the transporters for carbs, in just 2 weeks. And other studies have found even shorter periods that you can do significant improvements by dietary alterations. So to summarize, I think that if you have an endurance diet that contains a good amount of carbs, this may not be as important for you. But if you are on a low carb diet, this is could be a place where there's some low hanging fruit by increasing that amount of dietary carb that would help you probably to absorb more carbs. So, and this also is an important argument that against the quite recent media and social media hype around train low, race high strategies. There isn't really that much that speaks for that strategy, and I would really be interested to see if anybody knows of good evidence for train low, race high. Then please send it to me, and because I would love to review that as well. But from what I've seen, I haven't really seen any scientific evidence for that. Another thing that is related to all of this is the interview that I did with Jesse Kropolnicki in episode 40. It's called The Core Diet, but he goes very much into this and how he has his athletes consume carbs every single workout to be able to learn to absorb them and use them as fuel. So this all makes sense, or the interview with Jesse all starts to make sense when you look at the evidence that I just talked about here. And one study that I want to talk about still that wasn't in the review because it's so recent, it's from last year. It's an Australian study called 2 Weeks of Repetitive Gut Challenge, Reduce Exercise-Associated Gastrointestinal Symptoms and Malabsorption. That's a mouthful. It was published in the Scandinavian Journal of Medicine and Science in Sports. And as far as I'm aware, this is the first study to investigate training your gut to consume gels. So this study involved 18 trained runners, And they had a test that consisted of 2 hours of steady running at 60% of VO2 max, followed by a 1 hour time trial. And in those 2 hours before, they consumed 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour, and that was 3 gels, and each gel had 30 grams of carbohydrate in a 2-to-1 glucose to fructose ratio, and every 20 minutes they had a gel basically. And all of the subjects had at least moderate GI symptoms, and 67% of them had severe symptoms in that first trial that they did. And also 61% of them had they had a lot of waste carbohydrates, so malabsorption basically. They couldn't absorb as much of the carbohydrate as you would have expected to use as fuel in the time trial and in the exercise. So then they went into a period of gut training of 2 weeks. So they had, during those 2 weeks, they had 10 days of training, and every day was a 1 hour run at that same steady intensity, 60% of VO2 max. And half of the participants took 90 grams of carbohydrates, 3 gels every 20, or 1 gel every 20 minutes, 3 gels per hour, just as in the test. And the other half, they just had placebo gels that had the same taste and texture, but no carbs. And then they had a second gut challenge, as they called it, second test, just like the first one, 2 hours of steady running and then a 1 hour time trial. And a lot of the participants still had some GI symptoms, but in the gut training group, the symptoms, they really, really decreased significantly. They had a 44% reduction in gut discomfort and 60% in total GI symptoms. And very importantly, they reduced the amount of carbohydrate that went to waste, so less carbohydrate malabsorption than the placebo group that didn't change in any of these. So, and none of the gut training participants had severe GI symptoms anymore. They were moderate at most. For some of them, they were completely gone. And but the most important thing here is that they improved their time trial performance. So remember, it was a 1 hour time trial, and they improved it by 5%, while the placebo group didn't improve. So that is something that's very important. And the reasons are probably two. One, that they managed to absorb more carbs, and so they had more energy. They didn't bonk as much as the control group, sorry. And two, well, obviously, if you have GI discomfort, running fast becomes difficult. So these are the two reasons. And that's about it about gut training. So the key takeaways here is that you need to practice nutrition in training to learn both to tolerate it, reduce that discomfort, and to absorb it, to not have that malabsorption of carbohydrate. Because even if you tolerate it, if you never train with carbohydrate products, you might not get all of that energy into your working muscles to use as fuel. And again, this goes right along with what we talked about with Jesse Kropelnicki in episode 40 that I'll link to in the show notes and in the episode description as well. And the second takeaway here is that there isn't a lot going for a train low, race high strategy that has become popularized recently, as I said. Some of the things that we talked about from the review study by Asker Jokendrup is that a higher amount of carbohydrate in your day-to-day diet increases the transport capacity of carbohydrate, which is essential for being able to use any fuel that you take on board. So if you train low on and you have a low normal daily intake of carbohydrate, then you're not going to make the best use of the gels when you do take them in races. As usual, you can find the show notes for this episode on thattriathlonshow.com. Leave your comments or questions there. And in the next episode, I will interview David Peace, who is the author of the Swimming Technique and Biomechanics section of Triathlon Science, a book that I've talked about many, many times. and he joins me to talk about just that, swimming technique and biomechanics. So we'll revisit that topic, and it's about time because it's an important topic, and it's been quite some time since I've had an episode on that topic. We will definitely have John Keeley on to talk about periodization soon, but he's now waiting for his new computer, so it will probably be after mid-May, maybe late May or something like that. Some random house cleaning items. First, I have now done 2 pain-free runs, which I'm super excited about. I'm up to 17 minutes, and as you can hear, there's a long road ahead. But things are so much brighter now that I can run again. I'm still taking 2 days off for every day that I run, and I will increase volume very, very slowly. I keep going to the chiropractor. I might keep going to acupuncture. I think acupuncture has been a key really in getting me pain-free, because it was around the time that I started going to acupuncture that I started to see improvements. And I also will investigate with an orthopedic doctor if there is anything structurally wrong once more. So I have a big support team that helps me, which I'm very grateful for. And second, I know that you like podcasts, so I want to give a couple of shout outs to 2 podcasts. And first is a very new one, like literally a few days old, the Faster podcast by Flow Cycling. And the guys from Flow, John and Chris Fornham, are previous guests on the show. It was episode 31 called How to Shave 14 Minutes Off Your Ironman Bike Split. And they only have 1 episode out yet on the Faster podcast, but that was very good. It was an interview with Jonathan Lee from Trainer Road's podcast, and I definitely look forward to hearing more of their episodes coming out, so check that out if you're interested. And second, a totally non-triathlon related, but it's so brilliant that I just have to promote it. It's called Potterless. If you like Harry Potter, this is a podcast that you'll love. It's this guy, he's 24 years old, and he has never read any Harry Potter books. He's watched 4.5 movies, and now age 24, he starts reading the books, and he talks with like big Harry Potter fans about the books, and it makes all sorts of observations and holes in the plot, basically. It's just very funny. He reviews the books and kind of goes through them and what happens, and I've enjoyed it a lot. I don't think I'm making it justice, but if you like Harry Potter, then I think that you'll love the Potterless podcast. So let's thank our sponsors, and Precision Hydration is, as you know, the sponsor of this show. And I got an email recently from a listener called Steve. He wrote in saying, I'm sitting in an accommodation container in Kabul on a short mission with the UN Environment Team, listening to your podcasts. I subscribed last week and I posted a review. I want to send a short endorsement for Precision Hydration. I have a couple of tubes with me here, not only for the endurance sports purpose, but they are actually great for staying in a good hydrated shape when acclimatizing to the heat and climate here. Steve also wrote about his upcoming plans for the season, so good luck at Challenge Roth, Steve. I'm sure you'll be rocking pH in your bottles there as well. And if you want to do like Steve and take control of your hydration and your electrolytes, just go to precisionhydration.com and use the promo code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, all caps, to get your first box or tube for free. And thank you so much to Stack. If you are looking for a new indoor bike trainer, I highly recommend getting a Stack Zero or their new Smart Trainer. As I just said, my knee is getting in much better shape. There was a period when I couldn't bike at all. It was a pretty long period actually. But now I'm back up to 2 hours. Still haven't went out on the road. I'm still very careful and I want to be able to get off the trainer immediately if at any sign of pain. But I've been riding on my Stack on the patio in the Portuguese sun, and it feels like a fantastic victory. I do want to get out on the roads soon, but with the Stack I can, it's silent, it's foldable, and the silence definitely helps because I just sit and watch different TV shows with Portuguese subtitles to practice my Portuguese while I ride. So that's a big plus that I couldn't do with most other trainers because the noise would be too much for the poor sound quality that I have coming out of my laptop. You can learn more about the Stack and their new Smart Trainer as well on stackzero.com or stackzero.com/pre-order. Remember, just a few days left until the 30th of April to pre-order the new Smart Trainer. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.